There's absolutely nothing as nice as being able to pick your own lemon off your own tree, to put into a drink or to use in the kitchen.
Not only is a freshly picked lemon much nicer than anything you could buy in a shop, the tree itself is very attractive with its glossy green leaves. It's got beautiful sweetly scented flowers all year round, and the leaves themselves are also beautifully aromatic with a lovely zingy scent. But actually, they're not the easiest things to grow, and I'm going to give you the tips that I've learned over the years of how to grow them really successfully. This is from choosing the right compost, to choosing the best watering strategy, the most effective feeding regime, pests and diseases, pruning, and probably most importantly, location and how to overwinter. So let's start with the right compost to use. Now, all citrus trees need a slightly acidic compost, and one that is very sort of coarse and open to allow very free drainage. What lemon trees absolutely hate is to stand in soggy, wet soil, particularly over the winter months. That can kill them. So it's probably best, lemon trees are quite an expensive investment for you, so it's probably best actually to also invest in some special citrus compost at the same time. But if not, a good alternative might be to have some ericaceous compost, to which you've added at least 30% of some medium horticultural bark to get that nice kind of open structure that it needs. Now, your strategy with watering your lemon tree needs to be all or nothing. So wait until you can see it visibly suffering from lack of water. The leaves will go a little bit less glossy and droop a bit, and even you might find the fruit is getting a bit sort of soft and not as glossy to touch as the plant draws the water from the fruit. And only when it reaches the stage where it's clearly suffering from water stress, but then you go in and you absolutely drench it. No half measures, no just a little water like that every day. No, you go in and you give it an absolute flood of water. And you carry on watering until you actually see the water flowing out of the bottom of the pot. There now, I can just start to see it trickling through. Now in winter, it might just need watering once every few weeks when it's in its sort of dormant state. But when it starts into active growth again in the spring, and particularly in hot weather in the summer, it might need watering every 2 or 3 days. Now on to feeding. Now you'll definitely need to feed your lemons. You're taking a crop off them each year, and you need to replenish that goodness. But it's a balance. If you underfeed them, the leaves become very yellow, and although it may produce some fruit, the fruits will be very hard and not contain enough juice. But if you overfeed them, and this can be just as bad, you'll just get masses of very dark green foliage, and that can actually produce a microenvironment where pests and disease can flourish. But also it might not flower and fruit as well, because in general, if the foliage is too healthy, the plant thinks it doesn't need to produce seeds, flowers and seeds, and actually it will not produce as much. Now, in the summer months, when the leaves are growing actively, you need a high nitrogen feed to produce enough the green leaves to fill the fruit. Whereas in winter, when the leaves are not growing so strongly, you need to switch to a winter feed, which is higher in phosphate and potash, because it'll still have the fruit on the tree in the winter. That's the lovely thing about them. But it'll be more of a maintenance diet just to maintain that fruit and the root growth. So in summer, we'll feed every couple of weeks, whereas in winter, it'll be more like just once a month. Now, the feed we use is soluble, and we always make sure to do the feeding after it's had it's good drenching of water, because if you were to pour the food onto that very dry soil, as you've seen, it would probably just run through and run out of the holes at the bottom, and you'd waste it. So we make sure that the compost is actually quite nice and moist and will hold on to the feed. Now pruning. Now if you have a nicely established little tree like this, it really won't need much pruning. It's got a nice open centre here, and really your only job each spring will be to go through and maybe cut out some of the dead branches, or where it might have got a bit sort of congested in the middle. What you're aiming for is a plant with nice open branches that the air can circulate nicely around. And really, if you've got the feeding right and the pruning, a nice open shape like this, this really should reduce any trouble you have with pests and diseases as well. But occasionally you might need to do some more radical pruning if, for example, you've had a very bad infestation of pests and the only thing to do is to take that whole branch off. But the trouble with that is that produces a proliferation of kind of water shoots around that area. I've got in there and taken all the weak ones out and just left it with sort of 2 or 3 really good strong ones that will hopefully grow away now and then start to suppress any more growth of water shoots at the base there. Get the tree back to this nice open shape again. Now, how would you deal with pests and diseases on your lemon trees? The problems come is when you've overfed, or maybe you've kept the tree in the wrong place and it's got a lot of overgrowth, deep foliage and young growth and a very kind of humid atmosphere that encourage the pests. And the ones that might come in are scale insects, which just have little sort of flat brown insects that almost look inanimate, but they will cover all the leaf veins and sometimes the stems. You also might get some mealybug on it and sometimes aphid. Of these, probably the scale insect is the most serious and difficult to deal with. If it's just a small infestation, you can scrape them off with your nail, or you can try treating them with neem oil, which is an organic oil which sort of blocks their breathing holes. But they can be a real problem. So the best advice is to kind of follow the cultural techniques that don't allow them to get a hold in the first place. If it's a really bad infestation, it's probably best just to cut those parts of the tree out. As I said, then go on to ameliorate it with some corrective pruning afterwards. Aphids, I don't really worry too much about aphids. They will come in on the very young growth in the spring. And if you spot them early enough, you can just squish them with your fingers or jet them off with a jet of water. But we find actually that the little blue tits come in and pick them off and eat them. They don't seem to do the tree that much damage. They won't affect the fruit in any way. And we see really them just as part of the garden ecosystem. And if you encourage a lot of other predatory insects in your garden, you can almost just turn a blind eye, and probably the next time you look at them, you won't have so many. But the thing is, when you do have any of those pests, the aphids, the mealybugs, the scale insects, what you will also get is some blackened leaves and stems. And that's because the secretions from the pests are quite sweet, and they encourage some sooty molds to grow. And that's when you start to get the blackened leaves. If it's only a small area, you can wash this mold off. Large areas, again, you could cut some bits out. As I've said before, your best line of defense is to use the cultural techniques that produce enough ventilation and light and air and produce a healthy tree that actually doesn't get attacked by pests in this way. Now, finally, let's tackle where to site your lemon tree, and in particular, where to overwinter it. Now, in the UK, most citrus trees are very happy to stand outside for the summer. And I say we move ours out sort of around about Easter time. If there is then forecast a late frost, we would just throw a fleece over those to protect any of that young soft foliage that's coming through. I wouldn't choose a particularly hot exposed site because they do like a slightly sort of humid atmosphere around them. So I tend to choose a more sheltered location where they're surrounded by other trees and foliage. And I don't worry if it's in partial shade. They seem to be able to take that quite happily. If you're further north, maybe you would choose somewhere a little bit sort of sunnier. But in a UK winter, they really need some extra protection, as they can only really take a degree or 2 of frost. Now, ideally, this would be somewhere light, because they're evergreen and they would like to keep their leaves over the winter, but your house would be too warm for them. So ideally this would be something like an unheated conservatory or a greenhouse that has some sort of frost protection mechanism in place, or maybe somewhere like quite a cool unheated porch. You could also try a garden shed, particularly if it had a window or a roof light to let a little bit of light in. That would suffice. What may happen if their winter quarters are maybe a little bit too warm, or maybe a little bit too cold, or don't have enough light coming in, you might find they actually drop all their leaves. But don't panic too much, and certainly don't hard prune them after this, because once the right conditions are restored to them in the spring, they will often sprout again a complete new set of leaves. And in fact, nowadays, now our winter weather is quite unpredictable, I think we could adopt a more dynamic approach to overwintering our lemon trees. I mean, last winter it was mild here for a good couple of weeks in January with quite warm winter nights, and actually stood all mine outside for that time, and it did them good. The rain washed their leaves, and the wind and the sun actually improved the foliage on them quite a lot. But what you mustn't do is make that change too extreme. So you can't bring them from quite a warm overwintering place where the leaf growth is quite soft to suddenly stand them out in a cold wind. It must be from already quite a sort of cold environment for them, so the shock isn't too great. Otherwise they would again probably drop all their leaves. Now I hope I've managed to demystify how to grow lemons successfully to the point where you'll have a go yourself. And if you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel and to our blog at the3growbags.com.